In the vast darkness between stars, where civilizations rise and fall like whispers in the void, there exists an unwritten rule that has kept the galaxy in relative peace for millennia: never touch the humans' children. The Zephyrian Collective thought they were dealing with just another primitive species when they stumbled upon Kepler 442b, a small human research outpost on the edge of unexplored space. 300 souls, scientists, engineers, families who had traveled 47 light-years from Earth to study exotic matter and push the boundaries of human knowledge. To the Zephyrians, they were nothing more than insects to be swept aside in their expansion. They were wrong. What the collective didn't understand was that humans don't just mourn their dead, they remember them. They don't just seek justice, they deliver it with the fury of a star-going supernova. And, when you erase an entire human outpost from existence, when you murder children who were taking their first steps on an alien world, when you silence the laughter of families who dared to dream among the stars, you don't just declare war on humanity. You awaken something that has been sleeping in the human soul since they first looked up at the night sky and decided it wasn't enough to wonder, they had to conquer. The Zephyrian Collective was about to learn why humans are the only species that gives their warships names like Inevitable, Retribution, and Remember Them All. This is the story of how 300 human lives became the spark that set the galaxy ablaze, and how the Terran Armada reminded the universe why some sleeping giants should never be awakened. Dr. Sarah Chen had been dead for exactly 17 hours when the Terran Deep Space Monitoring Station picked up the last transmission from Kepler 442b. The automated distress beacon, designed to activate only when life support systems detected zero human life signs, sent its final digital scream across 47 light-years of empty space before the Exotic Matter Research Facility's fusion reactor went critical and painted the alien sky with human ambition turned to plasma. Commander Marcus Webb stood in the communications center aboard the orbital platform Terra Vigilant, staring at the holographic display that showed absolutely nothing where Research Station Prometheus should have been broadcasting from. The absence of signal was deafening. 300 people, men, women, children who had volunteered to push the boundaries of human knowledge, had simply vanished from the cosmic conversation. "Run the scan again," Webb ordered, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent 30 years in deep space and knew the difference between equipment failure and genuine catastrophe. Lieutenant Torres manipulated the controls with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across quantum-encrypted interfaces. The deep space arrays, sensitive enough to detect a candle flame from 3 star systems away, swept the Kepler 442 system once more. The results remained unchanged, silence where there should have been the constant chatter of an active research facility. "Sir," Torres said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm reading massive residual radiation signatures consistent with a total facility destruction." "But, the pattern." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting the cold light of the displays. "The pattern suggests this wasn't an accident." Webb moved closer to the tactical display, his weathered hands gripping the railing that separated him from the holographic representation of humanity's furthest outpost. The radiation signature told a story that made his blood run cold. Multiple impact points, systematic targeting of critical infrastructure, and a final massive explosion that could only have come from a deliberate overload of the station's power core. "Contact Earth immediately," he commanded. "Priority Alpha transmission. Someone murdered our people." The message would take 47 years to reach Earth at light speed, but humanity had long ago solved the problem of interstellar communication. Quantum entanglement transmitters, each paired with a corresponding device on Earth, could send information instantaneously across any distance. The technology was expensive, power-hungry, and reserved only for the most critical communications. This qualified. Dr. Elena Vesquez received the transmission in her office at the Terran Space Administration headquarters in Geneva. As the director of Deep Space Operations, she had overseen the establishment of 17 research stations beyond the Sol system. Prometheus had been her personal project, a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and thrive in the most hostile environments the galaxy could offer. Now it was gone. She read the report 3 times before the reality of it settled into her bones. The technical data was clear: Kepler 442b had been attacked by weapons technology far beyond current human capabilities. Energy signatures suggested directed plasma bombardment followed by systematic destruction of all infrastructure. There were no survivors. Among the dead was her daughter, Dr. Lisa Vasquez-Park, the station's lead xenogeologist, and Lisa's 6-year-old son Tommy, who had been the first human child born in the Kepler 442 system. The boy who had sent her grandmother pictures of the purple sunsets and the strange crystalline formations that grew in the planet's polar regions. Elena stared at the last family photo on her desk, Lisa holding Tommy while he proudly displayed a mineral sample that glowed with its own inner light. Behind them, the research station's main habitat gleamed like a jewel against the alien landscape. She activated her secure communication array and began composing the message that would change everything. President Catherine Morrison was in the middle of a cabinet meeting when her aide slipped the quantum encrypted message into her hand. The president of the Terran Federation read the single-paragraph summary and immediately called for an emergency recess. In her private office, she read the full report twice before reaching for the red phone that connected directly to Fleet Admiral Harrison's command center. "Admiral," she said without preamble, "how quickly can we mobilize the fleet?" Fleet Admiral David Harrison had been expecting this call since the Deep Space Monitoring Division had forwarded him the preliminary report 6 hours ago. The old soldier, veteran of the Martian colonial wars and architect of humanity's current military doctrine, had spent those hours reviewing battle plans that he had hoped would never be necessary. "Ma'am, we can have the 3rd Deep Space Battle Group mobilized within 72 hours. Full deployment of the 7th and 9th Battle Groups within 2 weeks. But, I have to ask, are we talking about a rescue operation or something else?" President Morrison looked out her window at the bustling streets of New Geneva, where humans went about their daily lives unaware that their species had just been bloodied for the first time since achieving interstellar capability. "Admiral, 300 of our people were murdered. That includes civilians, families, children who had never known any world but their distant one. We're not talking about rescue. We're talking about making sure this never happens again." The Admiral's voice carried the grimness of a man who understood the weight of what was being contemplated. "Ma'am, a full military response against an unknown alien threat. The implications, Admiral, are that humanity has just learned we're not alone in the galaxy, and our new neighbors introduced themselves by committing genocide against our people. I want every ship we have combat ready. I want our best minds figuring out how to get them to Kepler 442 faster than anything has ever moved through space. And I want the aliens responsible for this to understand that they've made a very serious mistake." Across the solar system, the machinery of human civilization began to transform itself for war. Shipyards that had been producing exploration vessels and cargo haulers retooled for military production. The massive orbital factories around Jupiter, designed to support the expansion of human civilization, began manufacturing weapons of war on a scale that had never before been attempted. Dr. Chen Wei, Director of Advanced Propulsion Research at the Luna facility, received a visit from 3 men in black uniforms who presented him with presidential authorization to begin immediate development of military applications for experimental faster-than-light technology. The quantum tunnel drive, still in theoretical stages, would need to become operational within months rather than decades. "You're asking for the impossible," Dr. Chen told them, reviewing the specifications they had brought. "No," replied Colonel James Reeves, the senior officer in the group. "We're asking you to do what humans do best, achieve the impossible when someone threatens our family." At the Titan shipyards, Master Shipwright Anna Kowalski received orders to begin construction of vessels unlike anything in humanity's current inventory. These would not be exploration ships or research platforms. They would be instruments of war, designed for a single purpose: to project human power across interstellar distances with overwhelming force. The first of these ships, designated the TNS Retribution, began construction 18 hours after the news from Kepler 442b reached Earth. Her keel was laid with metal that had been forged in the heart of Sol's own fusion fires, and her hull would carry the names of every person who had died at Research Station Prometheus. In the research laboratories beneath Mars' polar ice caps, Dr. Samuel Hayes and his team received unlimited funding and resources to develop weapons that could function in the exotic physics environment of interstellar space. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles that could cross light years while maintaining destructive velocity, and defensive systems that could protect human ships from whatever technology had destroyed Prometheus. But perhaps the most important work was happening in the quantum communications facility on Europa, where Dr. Yuki Tanaka was developing something that no military force in history had ever possessed: real-time command and control across interstellar distances. If humanity was going to war among the stars, they would do it with coordination and precision that would make their response as swift and inevitable as gravity itself. In the 47 years since humanity had first achieved faster-than-light travel, they had established 17 research stations, surveyed more than 300 star systems, and made contact with exactly 0 other intelligent species. They had begun to believe that they were alone in the galaxy, that the great cosmic silence was evidence that intelligence was rarer than they had hoped. The destruction of Kepler 442b had taught them otherwise. They were not alone, and their first contact with galactic civilization had been an act of unprovoked murder. The Zephyrian Collective, busy cataloging the mineral wealth of what had briefly been a human world, had no idea that their casual genocide had just awakened something that had been sleeping in human DNA since the first proto-human looked at a neighboring tribe and decided that some acts demanded not just response, but absolute retribution. In war rooms across the solar system, humanity's finest military minds began planning Operation Prometheus, named for the fire that the Titans had stolen from the gods and given to humanity. It would be the largest military operation in human history, involving every branch of the Terran military and the combined industrial capacity of 4 worlds. The aliens who had destroyed Research Station Prometheus were about to learn why humans were the only known species that named their children after concepts like hope, faith, and justice, and why they named their warships after concepts like vengeance, fury, and inevitable retribution. The age of humanity's innocence among the stars was over. What came next would be written in the language that the galaxy had forced them to learn: violence, applied with the precision of human engineering and the relentlessness of human memory. The Zephyrian Collective had 3 months to enjoy their conquest before the first human battle fleets would arrive at Kepler 442b. 3 months before they would discover that destroying a human outpost had not eliminated a problem, it had created one that would spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Fleet Admiral David Harrison stood on the bridge of the TNS Inevitable, humanity's newest and most advanced dreadnought, watching the swirling blue-white tunnel of quantum-distorted space that surrounded his battle group as they traveled faster than light toward their destiny. Behind him, holographic displays showed the positions of 47 other warships, each one carrying enough firepower to level a continent. 3 months of preparation had transformed humanity from explorers into conquerors. The quantum tunnel drives that Dr. Chenway had declared impossible were now propelling the largest military force in human history across 47 light-years of space in a matter of weeks rather than decades. The technology was untested, dangerous, and pushed the boundaries of known physics, which made it perfectly suited to humanity's current mood. Admiral, reported Captain Sarah Kim, the Inevitable's commanding officer, were receiving final preparation signals from all ships in the battle group. Estimated arrival at Kepler 442 in 6 hours. Harrison nodded, his weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the quantum tunnel. At 62, he had dedicated his entire adult life to the protection of human civilization. He had fought in the Martian colonial wars, commanded the defense of the Europa mining colonies during the asteroid crisis, and overseen the integration of faster-than-light technology into human military doctrine. But this mission was unlike anything in his experience. This was not about territory or resources or political power. This was about making a statement that would echo across the galaxy for millennia: humanity protected its own, and those who threatened human lives would face consequences beyond their worst nightmares. The battle group's composition reflected humanity's approach to the problem. At its heart were 12 dreadnoughts, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Surrounding them were 24 heavy cruisers equipped with the latest plasma weapons and kinetic bombardment systems. The outer defensive screen consisted of 36 destroyers, fast and maneuverable ships designed to intercept any threats before they could reach the capital ships. But the most important vessels in the fleet were not the warships. 3 massive logistics ships carried the equipment and personnel necessary to establish a permanent human presence in the Kepler 442 system. Once the immediate threat was eliminated, humanity intended to rebuild their research station and ensure that this sector of space remained under Terran protection. "Signal from the reconnaissance drones, sir," announced Lieutenant Commander Torres from her position at the communications station. "They've successfully penetrated the system's outer boundary. Initial scans show significant alien presence on Kepler 442b and in orbital positions around the planet." Harrison moved to the tactical display, where a three-dimensional representation of the Kepler 442 system was beginning to populate with data from the advanced scout drones that had been launched ahead of the main fleet. What he saw confirmed his worst fears and justified his preparations. The planet that had once hosted research station Prometheus was now crawling with alien structures. Massive mining operations scarred the surface where human habitats had once stood. Orbital platforms surrounded the world like a technological spiderweb, clearly designed for large-scale resource extraction. "They're strip mining our world," he said quietly, his voice carrying the cold fury that had driven humanity across the stars. "They murdered our people for mining rights." The tactical analysis painted a clearer picture of what humanity was facing. The Zephyrian Collective had established a significant presence in the system, with what appeared to be several hundred ships of various sizes and purposes. The aliens had treated the destruction of Prometheus as merely clearing obstacles from a development site. "Admiral," called Dr. Elizabeth Nash from her position at the science station, "I'm reading energy signatures that match the weapon systems used in the attack on Prometheus. The orbital platforms are heavily armed, and I count at least 30 vessels that appear to be dedicated warships." Harrison studied the display with the practiced eye of a career military officer. The Zephyrian forces outnumbered his battle group, but they were clearly not expecting military resistance. Their ships were positioned for resource extraction, not combat. Their weapons were pointed downward at the planet's surface, not outward toward potential threats. They had made a classic mistake. They had assumed that destroying Prometheus had ended the problem rather than beginning it. "Communications," Harrison ordered, "prepare to transmit on all frequencies. I want every alien vessel in this system to receive our message." The quantum communication array aboard the Inevitable was capable of broadcasting across multiple subspace frequencies simultaneously, ensuring that any technological civilization would detect and understand the transmission. The message had been carefully crafted by the best linguistic experts and military strategists in the Terran Federation. "This is Fleet Admiral David Harrison of the Terran Space Forces, commanding the 1st Retribution Battle Group. You are occupying a world that belongs to humanity and the site of unprovoked genocide against Terran civilians. You have 60 standard minutes to evacuate all personnel and vessels from this system. Any alien presence remaining after the deadline will be considered hostile and will be destroyed without further warning." The message was transmitted in 17 different mathematical languages, each one designed to be comprehensible to any species that had achieved interstellar flight. There could be no misunderstanding of humanity's intentions. Aboard the Zephyrian Collective's flagship Dominant Consensus, Fleet Commander Thektar received the human transmission with what could only be described as amused contempt. The mammalian species that had briefly occupied the resource-rich world had been eliminated with trivial effort. The idea that they possessed the capability for interstellar warfare was laughable. "Ignore the transmission," Thektar commanded his bridge crew. "Continue extraction operations. If any primitive vessels enter the system, destroy them as we destroyed their colony." It was a decision that would live in galactic history as the moment when a minor species made the catastrophic error of underestimating human determination. Admiral Harrison waited exactly 61 minutes before ordering the attack. "All ships, battle stations. Execute Operation Prometheus. Show them what happens when you murder human children." The Terran battle group dropped out of quantum tunnel space at the edge of the Kepler 442 system with the precision of a surgical instrument and the devastating power of a natural disaster. 48 human warships materialized in perfect formation, their weapons already locked onto predetermined targets. The lead dreadnoughts opened fire first. Plasma cannons that had been designed to cut through asteroid belts sent coherent streams of star-hot energy across millions of kilometers of space. The beams struck the outer ring of Zephyrian mining platforms with devastating effect, vaporizing installations that had taken months to construct. The heavy cruisers followed with kinetic bombardments, solid projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by magnetic launchers. The projectiles struck orbital facilities with the force of nuclear weapons, turning sophisticated alien technology into expanding clouds of superheated debris. But the most devastating weapons in the human arsenal were the quantum disruption warheads carried by the destroyers. These weapons manipulated the fundamental forces that held matter together, creating localized regions of space where the normal laws of physics ceased to function. Alien vessels caught in the disruption field simply ceased to exist, their atoms scattered across dimensional boundaries that human science barely understood. The Zephyrian response was immediate but uncoordinated. Their ships had been designed for resource extraction and colonial pacification, not military engagement with a technologically advanced enemy. Their weapons were powerful enough to destroy planetary settlements but inadequate against shielded human warships. Fleet Commander Thektar watched his carefully constructed mining operation disintegrate under human firepower. In less than 10 minutes, the collective had lost more resources than they had invested in the entire Kepler 442 colonization effort. The mammalian species that he had dismissed as primitives was systematically destroying everything the collective had built in the system. "Retreat," he ordered. "Signal all vessels to withdraw immediately." But Admiral Harrison had anticipated this response. The human battle group had been positioned to control all major hyperspace exit points from the system. As Zephyrian vessels attempted to flee, they found their escape routes blocked by human destroyers equipped with quantum interdiction fields that prevented faster-than-light travel. "No one leaves," Harrison announced on the Fleet Command channel. "They came here to murder our people and steal our world. They don't get to walk away from that." The battle that followed was less a military engagement than a demonstration of human engineering applied to the problem of absolute retribution. The Zephyrian collective had superior numbers, but humanity had superior technology, better training, and, most importantly, the focused rage of a species that had just learned they were not alone in the galaxy and that their new neighbors were murderers. One by one, alien vessels were hunted down and destroyed. The advanced sensor systems aboard human ships could track targets through asteroid fields and nebular dust. The quantum communication arrays allowed perfect coordination between vessels separated by millions of kilometers. The weapons systems, designed by engineers who had spent 3 months thinking of nothing but the most efficient ways to kill aliens, functioned with lethal precision. The last Zephyrian ship, the flightship Dominant Consensus, was cornered near the system's primary asteroid belt after a running battle that lasted 6 hours. Fleet Commander Thektar, faced with inevitable destruction, transmitted a final message to the human fleet. "Why?" the alien commander asked. "Why do you fight with such fury over one small world? The galaxy contains billions of systems. Find another." Admiral Harrison's response would be recorded in the military academies of a dozen species and studied for centuries as an example of human psychology applied to interstellar warfare. "Because they were ours," he said simply. "And because you need to understand that humanity remembers everything, forgives nothing, and never stops coming." The Dominant Consensus was destroyed by concentrated fire from 3 human dreadnoughts, its wreckage joining the debris field that had once been the pride of the Zephyrian Collective's expansion fleet. As the battle ended, Admiral Harrison stood on the bridge of the inevitable, looking at the tactical display that showed a system swept clean of alien presence. The orbital mining platforms had been reduced to scrap metal. The surface installations had been obliterated by kinetic bombardments. The Zephyrian colonial effort had been completely eradicated. But the most important work was yet to come. "Signal the logistics ships," he ordered. "Begin construction of Prometheus Base immediately. I want a permanent military presence established here within the week. And send a message to Earth, tell them we need colonists. This world is going to remain human." As construction ships began the work of rebuilding human civilization on Kepler 442b, Admiral Harrison composed the after-action report that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. The Terran Federation had just announced its presence to galactic civilization not with exploration or diplomacy, but with overwhelming military force applied in defense of human lives. The message was clear: humanity was no longer a minor species confined to one small system. They were a power to be reckoned with, and they would defend their people with technology and determination that made them extremely dangerous enemies. Across the galaxy, other civilizations monitored the quantum communication bursts from Kepler 442 and began to understand that the cosmic balance of power had shifted. A new player had entered the galactic community, and they had introduced themselves by completely annihilating another species' colonial effort in retaliation for genocide. The Zephyrian Collective, mourning the loss of an entire fleet and the resources invested in the Kepler 442 operation, faced a choice that would determine their species' future relationship with humanity. They could accept the loss and avoid further contact with the aggressive mammals, or they could escalate the conflict and risk discovering just how far human fury could reach across the stars. The decision they made would echo across the galaxy and determine whether humanity's introduction to galactic civilization would end with this single act of retribution, or whether it was merely the beginning of a much larger demonstration of human military capability. Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Concord stood before the assembled delegates of 43 species, his forearms gesturing emphatically as he delivered news that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. The vast amphitheater on Nexus Prime, the neutral world that served as the galaxy's diplomatic center, had never hosted a session quite like this one. The species that calls itself humanity has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our current threat assessment models, the ambassador announced, his translated words echoing through the chamber's acoustic enhancement fields. 3 rotations ago, they eliminated an entire Zephyrian colonial fleet, 47 vessels, without sustaining a single casualty. A ripple of concern passed through the assembled delegates. The Zephyrian Collective was not considered a major military power, but they possessed advanced technology and had been expanding their territory for over 2 centuries. The idea that an unknown species could destroy their entire operation with such efficiency was deeply troubling. Councillor Thora of the Vorthan Republic, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into dancing rainbows, was the first to speak. What is the strategic assessment of this, humanity's intentions? Are they seeking territorial expansion or responding to perceived aggression? Ambassador Veltar consulted the holographic display that materialized before him, showing the known details of what intelligence agencies across the galaxy were already calling the Kepler 442 incident. According to our analysis of intercepted communications, the humans had established a research facility on Kepler 442b. The Zephyrian Collective eliminated this facility and its 300 inhabitants as part of their standard colonial expansion protocol. The human response was... He paused, searching for appropriate diplomatic language. Disproportionately aggressive. High Admiral Zorix of the Hegemony Defense Corps leaned forward, her cybernetic implants glowing with increased activity as she processed tactical data. Define disproportionately aggressive, Ambassador. Our intelligence suggests the humans deployed weapons systems that violate several articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention. The quantum disruption warheads used by human destroyers had indeed attracted attention throughout the galaxy. Such weapons were theoretically possible but had been banned by interstellar treaty due to their indiscriminate destructive potential. The fact that a newly discovered species possessed not only the technology but the willingness to use it suggested a fundamental difference in their approach to warfare. The humans appear to operate under a military doctrine that prioritizes absolute victory over proportional response, Veltar explained. Their tactical analysis indicates they designed their entire battle plan around ensuring no Zephyrian vessel could escape to report the engagement. This suggests long-term strategic thinking rather than emotional retaliation. The implications of this assessment sent waves of unease through the assembled delegates. Galactic warfare had evolved over millennia into a highly regulated affair, with established protocols for territorial disputes, colonial rights, and acceptable casualty ratios. Conflicts were typically resolved through limited engagements followed by negotiated settlements. Total annihilation of enemy forces was considered barbarically inefficient. Councillor Wrath of the Stellar Commonwealth, his reptilian features displaying the ceremonial scars of his warrior caste, stood to address the assembly. If these humans seek to impose their primitive warfare concepts on civilized space, they must be contained before they destabilize the entire sector. With respect, Counselor, interrupted Dr. Ligia of the Academic Collective, her voice carrying the calm authority of a species dedicated to scientific inquiry. Preliminary xenopsychological analysis suggests that human aggression may be contextually triggered rather than inherently expansionist. They responded with overwhelming force specifically because their civilian population was targeted. This indicates a strong protective instinct rather than generic bloodlust. The debate that followed would continue for 7 standard days and reshape galactic diplomacy. Some species advocated for immediate military intervention to contain the human threat. Others argued for cautious observation and potential diplomatic contact. A few forward-thinking delegates even suggested that humanity might prove to be a valuable ally if their protective instincts could be channeled appropriately. Meanwhile, in the Zephyrian home system of Ketra, the collective's leadership faced a crisis that threatened the stability of their entire civilization. The loss of the Kepler 442 expedition represented more than just material resources, it was a devastating blow to their species' reputation as efficient colonial administrators. Supreme Coordinator Drakthal convened an emergency session of the Expansion Council, bringing together the most senior military and political leaders of the collective. The holographic conference room materialized around participants scattered across multiple worlds, creating a virtual space where the future of their species would be decided. The mammals have cost us 17 billion credits in destroyed assets and terminated 47 colonial contracts, reported Economic Coordinator Velthuk, his tentacles writhing with barely suppressed agitation. Our expansion program has been set back by at least 20 rotations. Something must be done. Fleet Commander Isikatar, recently promoted to replace the deceased Thektar, presented the military analysis that had been haunting collective leadership since news of the defeat reached their homeworld. The humans demonstrated technological capabilities that suggest they have been developing military applications for significantly longer than their apparent interstellar presence would indicate. Their weapons systems show sophisticated understanding of exotic physics and quantum manipulation. Supreme Coordinator Drakthal listened to the reports with the patience of a leader who had guided the collective through 3 centuries of expansion. The Zephyrians had built their civilization on careful calculation and efficient resource utilization. Emotional decision-making was considered a sign of primitive thinking. But the complete destruction of their Kepler 442 operation had introduced variables that their traditional analysis couldn't properly address. What are the strategic options? Drakthal asked. Military Coordinator Heshrak outlined the 3 primary courses of action that had emerged from their planning sessions. First, we can treat this as an acceptable loss and avoid further contact with human space. This minimizes immediate risk but establishes a precedent that could encourage other species to challenge our expansion efforts. The collective had built their interstellar empire on the principle that resistance to their colonization efforts was futile. Allowing humans to successfully defend their territory might inspire other species to attempt similar resistance, potentially undermining the entire foundation of Zephyrian power. Second, Heshrak continued, we can escalate the conflict and commit significant military resources to eliminating the human threat entirely. This would demonstrate our commitment to colonial objectives but could prove extremely costly if human capabilities exceed our current assessments. The third option was the most complex and carried the greatest potential for both success and catastrophic failure. Finally, we can seek alliance with other galactic powers to contain humanity through collective action. This would distribute the risk and cost but would also involve acknowledging that the collective requires assistance to handle a single species. The debate within the Zephyrian leadership reflected the broader galactic uncertainty about how to respond to humanity's emergence as a military power. They were facing the same fundamental question that had challenged interstellar civilization for millennia: how do you respond when a new species refuses to follow established rules? On Earth, President Morrison convened her own strategic planning session with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the heads of various intelligence agencies. The successful defense of Kepler 442b had bought humanity time, but it had also announced their presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. Intelligence estimates suggest that we're now being monitored by at least 12 separate galactic civilizations, reported Director Patricia Hayes of the Terran Intelligence Service. Some appear to be evaluating us as potential threats, while others seem interested in our military technology. Fleet Admiral Harrison, recently returned from Kepler 442b, presented the strategic situation from a military perspective. We've established that human technology can compete with anything we've encountered so far. Our weapons systems performed better than expected, and our tactical coordination gave us significant advantages. But we're also dealing with numerical disadvantages that could become critical in a prolonged conflict. The sobering reality was that humanity controlled 17 star systems while galactic civilization encompassed thousands. If the galaxy decided that humanity represented an unacceptable threat, the numerical odds would be overwhelming. What about diplomatic options? Asked President Morrison. Has anyone attempted to make contact? Director Hayes consulted her classified briefings. We've detected monitoring probes in 7 of our systems, but no direct communication attempts. The galactic community appears to be in a wait-and-see mode, trying to determine whether Kepler 442b represents our standard operating procedure or a special case. General Patricia Collins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, presented the military planning that had been developed in response to these intelligence assessments. We're recommending accelerated militarization of all outer systems and development of rapid response capabilities that can reinforce any threatened position within 72 hours. If we're going to maintain our independence, we need to convince potential adversaries that attacking any human world will result in consequences similar to what the Zephyrians experienced. President Morrison reviewed the classified reports that painted a picture of humanity as a small but technologically sophisticated species surrounded by larger civilizations with unclear intentions. The successful defense of Kepler 442b had bought them respect and fear in equal measure, but it had also made them a known quantity in galactic politics. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said finally, 3 months ago we thought we were alone in the galaxy. Today we know we're outnumbered by civilizations that have been playing this game for thousands of years. Our response to the Zephyrian attack has announced our presence, but it's also created expectations about how we'll respond to future threats. She stood and moved to the holographic display showing human space as a tiny cluster of stars in a galaxy filled with established powers. We can't retreat back into isolation. We can't hide from civilizations that now know we exist and that we have technology they want or fear. We have to decide what kind of galactic neighbor humanity is going to be. The decision reached in that meeting would establish the foundation for humanity's long-term survival strategy. They would build their military capabilities to the point where attacking any human world would be prohibitively expensive, while simultaneously demonstrating that they were willing to coexist peacefully with neighbors who respected their sovereignty. But the implementation of this strategy would require resources, technology, and industrial capacity on a scale that had never been attempted in human history. Every world in human space would need to contribute to the defense of human civilization. Every research institution would need to focus on military applications. Every citizen would need to understand that humanity's survival depended on their ability to make potential enemies believe that humans were too dangerous to attack and too valuable to ignore. The galaxy had noticed humanity, and now humanity would have to prove they deserved to survive in a cosmic community that was far more dangerous and complex than they had ever imagined. Across the stars, intelligence agencies monitored human activities with growing interest. The species that had emerged from the small yellow star designated Sol 3 had demonstrated capabilities that demanded careful evaluation. Some civilizations saw them as potential allies whose military technology could be useful in their own territorial disputes. Others viewed them as a threat that needed to be contained before they could destabilize the careful balance of galactic power. But all of them agreed on one fundamental point: humanity had announced their presence with such decisive force that ignoring them was no longer an option. The galaxy would have to find a place for humans in the existing order, or risk discovering whether the destruction of the Zephyrian fleet was an anomaly or a preview of humanity's full military potential. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, Captain Elena Vesquez stood on the bridge of the TNS Diplomatic Immunity, humanity's first purpose-built diplomatic vessel, as it approached the neutral space station Harmony Point. The irony of her name was not lost on anyone aboard. She was the daughter of Dr. Elena Vesquez, whose granddaughter had died in the Zephyrian attack, and she was now humanity's chief negotiator in their first formal contact with galactic civilization. The massive space station that materialized on their forward screens was a testament to the complexity of interstellar diplomacy. Harmony Point had been constructed by 17 different species, each contributing their unique architectural and technological approaches to create a structure that could accommodate the diverse environmental needs of galactic civilization. Atmospheric zones ranged from the high-pressure methane environments preferred by the Kaltorian Empire to the crystalline matrices that housed photosynthetic species like the Luminari Collective. Captain, reported Commander Zhang from the navigation station, were receiving approach vectors and atmospheric specifications for the human diplomatic section. It appears they'd been expecting us. The human section of Harmony Point had been constructed in the 3 weeks since President Morrison had accepted the Galactic Concord's invitation to formal diplomatic contact. The speed of construction suggested that galactic civilization possessed industrial capabilities that dwarfed even humanity's advanced manufacturing technology. As the diplomatic immunity docked with the station, Captain Vasquez reviewed the intelligence briefings that would determine humanity's approach to these negotiations. The galaxy was more complex and dangerous than their initial assessments had suggested. Political alliances shifted constantly, territorial disputes were ongoing in 17 different sectors, and the economic competition for rare resources had created tensions that occasionally erupted into limited warfare. The Galactic Concord that had invited humanity to Harmony Point was not a unified government but, rather, a loose confederation of species committed to maintaining interstellar stability through negotiated settlements. Their invitation to humanity had been prompted by concern that the destruction of the Zephyrian fleet might be the beginning of a larger destabilization of the region. Ambassador Sarah Mitchell, humanity's first official representative to galactic civilization, joined Captain Vasquez in the briefing room as they prepared for first contact with species whose names they had learned from intercepted communications. The key players are fairly clear, Mitchell explained, consulting the holographic displays that showed the political map of local galactic space. The Vorthan Republic controls the largest territory and has the most advanced technology. They're concerned that our military capabilities might upset the balance of power that has kept their borders secure for 3 centuries. The Vorthans had been monitoring human space intensively since Kepler 442b, deploying stealth reconnaissance probes that pushed the boundaries of the non-interference protocols that governed galactic intelligence gathering. Their analysis had concluded that humanity possessed technological advantages in several key areas, particularly weapons systems and tactical coordination. The Hegemony Defense Corps represents a military alliance of 6 species that provide collective security for smaller civilizations. They're interested in our weapons technology but concerned that our tactical doctrines might be incompatible with their rules of engagement. The quantum disruption warheads that had devastated the Zephyrian fleet had attracted particular attention from military analysts across the galaxy. The weapons were devastatingly effective but raised concerns about their potential for civilian casualties and environmental damage. The Stellar Commonwealth is probably our best potential ally, Mitchell continued. They have a strong warrior tradition and respect decisive action in defense of civilian populations. Their representative, Counselor Rath, has indicated that they view our response to the Zephyrian attack as appropriate and proportional. But the most intriguing potential ally was the Academic Collective, a confederation of species dedicated to scientific advancement and knowledge sharing. Their preliminary analysis of human technology had identified several areas where human research could contribute to galactic scientific progress. Dr. Ligia of the Academic Collective has specifically requested information about our faster-than-light communication systems and quantum manipulation technology. They're offering to share their archives of galactic history and xenobiology research in exchange. The negotiations that followed would establish humanity's place in the galactic community, but they would also determine whether human civilization could maintain its independence while integrating into a cosmic political system that had existed for millennia. The first formal session took place in the Grand Assembly Chamber, a vast spherical space that could accommodate representatives from 47 different species. Captain Vasquez and Ambassador Mitchell entered the chamber to find themselves the focus of intense scrutiny from beings whose diversity challenged human comprehension. The Vorthan representative was a crystalline entity that communicated through controlled light emissions. The Hegemony delegation included both organic and cybernetic intelligences linked through quantum communication networks. The Academic Collective was represented by a collective consciousness housed in a sophisticated android body. Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Concord called the session to order with ceremonial gestures that had been refined over centuries of interstellar diplomacy. We gather to welcome the species known as humanity into the community of galactic civilization, he announced. Their recent demonstration of military capabilities has raised questions about their intentions and their compatibility with established protocols for interstellar relations. Ambassador Mitchell rose to address the assembly, her words carefully chosen to establish humanity's position without appearing either threatening or weak. The human species seeks peaceful coexistence with all galactic civilizations, she began. Our response to the unprovoked attack on our civilian research facility was designed to prevent similar attacks in the future. We do not seek territorial expansion beyond our established colonies, but we will defend human lives and human worlds with whatever force is necessary. The response from the Zephyrian delegation was immediate and predictable. Fleet Commander Essa Qatar, attending the session via holographic projection, challenged humanity's characterization of their colonial expansion as unprovoked aggression. The collective followed established protocols for territorial acquisition, he argued. The mammalian settlement was properly surveyed and determined to be a minor obstacle to legitimate development. Standard procedure was followed. The exchange that followed would define humanity's relationship with galactic civilization. Ambassador Mitchell's response had been prepared by teams of psychologists, military strategists, and diplomatic experts who understood that this moment would determine whether humanity would be treated as an equal partner or a potential threat to be contained. Counselor Esekatar, Mitchell replied, "Humanity recognizes no authority's right to determine that our civilians are minor obstacles to anyone's development plans." The 300 people who died on Kepler 442b included children who had never known any world but that one. They included scientists whose research was expanding the boundaries of knowledge for all sapient species. They included families who had committed their lives to humanity's expansion into the galaxy. She paused, allowing her words to be translated into the 17 different languages used by the assembled delegates. If galactic civilization operates under protocols that classify civilian populations as expendable obstacles to territorial expansion, then humanity rejects those protocols and will defend our people according to our own standards of acceptable behavior. The chamber fell silent as delegates processed the implications of humanity's position. They were essentially rejecting the established order of galactic politics and announcing their intention to enforce their own standards through military force. Dr. Ligia of the Academic Collective was the first to respond, her android form projecting calm rationality as she addressed the fundamental philosophical question raised by humanity's stance. The protocols that govern territorial expansion have evolved over millennia to minimize conflict between expanding civilizations, she explained. They are based on mathematical analysis of resource requirements, population densities, and technological capabilities. Emotional attachments to specific locations are considered inefficient variables in this analysis. Ambassador Mitchell's response would be recorded in diplomatic archives across the galaxy and studied for centuries as an example of human psychology applied to interstellar relations. Dr. Ligia, humanity's emotional attachment to our people is not an inefficient variable, it is the core principle that defines our civilization. We do not expand into space to accumulate resources or territory. We expand to give our children opportunities to explore, discover, and build something better than what they inherited. When you destroy our colonies, you are not removing obstacles to development. You are murdering our future. High Admiral Zorix of the Hegemony Defense Corps leaned forward, her cybernetic implants processing the tactical implications of humanity's position with military precision. Ambassador Mitchell, if humanity rejects established protocols for territorial disputes, how do you propose to resolve conflicts with other expanding civilizations? Do you intend to respond to every territorial challenge with the level of force you deployed against the Zephyrian Collective? The question cut to the heart of the galaxy's concern about humanity's emergence as a military power. If humans were willing to completely destroy opposing forces over territorial disputes, the careful balance that maintained interstellar stability could collapse into widespread warfare. Admiral Zorix, Mitchell replied, humanity's response will be proportional to the threat posed to human lives. Territorial disputes can be resolved through negotiation. Resource conflicts can be addressed through trade agreements. But attacks on human civilians will be met with whatever level of force is necessary to prevent similar attacks in the future. Counselor Wrath of the Stellar Commonwealth stood to address the assembly, his scarred features displaying approval of humanity's straightforward approach to the defense of their people. The mammals speak with the voice of a warrior species, he declared. They do not hide their strength behind diplomatic language or pretend that their commitment to defending their people is negotiable. This is refreshing in a galaxy where too many civilizations have forgotten that some principles are worth fighting for. The support from the Stellar Commonwealth was significant, but it also highlighted the challenge facing galactic diplomacy. Humanity's emergence was forcing other species to choose between established protocols and moral principles that had been compromised for the sake of stability. Over the following days, the negotiations evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of humanity being integrated into existing structures, the discussions focused on creating new frameworks that could accommodate human values while maintaining interstellar stability. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Ligia of the Academic Collective proposed a solution that satisfied both humanity's need for security and the galaxy's need for predictable protocols. Perhaps, she suggested, the solution is not to force humanity to accept existing territorial protocols, but to establish clear boundaries within which human standards will be respected by all galactic civilizations. The proposal that emerged from this suggestion would revolutionize interstellar law. The Human Protection Accord would establish that any world with a human population of more than 50 individuals would be considered sovereign human territory, immune from territorial acquisition by other species. In exchange, humanity would commit to limiting their territorial expansion to worlds within clearly defined boundaries and would provide military assistance to other species facing existential threats to their civilian populations. The negotiations to establish these boundaries were complex and occasionally heated. Some species worried that giving humanity special protection for their colonies would set a precedent that other civilizations would demand. Others argued that humanity's demonstrated military capabilities made it impractical to enforce traditional territorial protocols against them. But the decisive factor was the growing recognition that humanity offered something that galactic civilization had been missing: a species willing to fight and die for principles rather than resources. Their technology was advanced, their military tactics were effective, and their commitment to protecting civilian populations was absolute. The final agreement, signed by representatives of 31 species, established humanity as a protected power with guaranteed sovereignty over their existing colonies and the right to expand within defined boundaries. In exchange, humanity committed to sharing their defensive technology with smaller civilizations and providing military assistance in cases involving genocide or attacks on civilian populations. As Captain Vasquez prepared to return to Earth with news of humanity's successful integration into galactic civilization, she reflected on the price that had been paid for this achievement. The 300 people who had died on Kepler 442b had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had secured humanity's place among the stars and established principles that would protect countless civilian populations across the galaxy. But the agreement also created new responsibilities. Humanity was no longer just a small species trying to survive in a dangerous galaxy. They were now the guardians of principles that many civilizations had abandoned in favor of pragmatic compromise. The next phase of humanity's galactic presence would determine whether they could live up to the promises they had made and the expectations they had created. The galaxy was watching to see if the species that had emerged from Sol 3 could maintain their moral principles while navigating the complex realities of interstellar politics. The test would come sooner than anyone expected. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the command bridge of the TNS Remember Them All, flagship of the Second Human Intervention Fleet, watching the horrific light show playing out across the surface of Vylos Prime. The planet that had once been home to 12 million members of the Thylorian Confederacy was dying beneath concentrated plasma bombardment from a hegemony pacification fleet. 2 years had passed since humanity had signed the Human Protection Accord and committed themselves to defending civilian populations across the galaxy. This was their first test of that commitment, and the stakes could not have been higher. Admiral, reported Captain Chen from the tactical station, the hegemony force consists of 47 vessels, including 12 heavy dreadnoughts. They've rejected our ultimatum to cease bombardment operations and withdraw from Thylorian space. The situation had developed rapidly over the past month. The Thylorian Confederacy, a peaceful species of philosophers and artists, had discovered massive deposits of quantum crystalline formations on 3 of their outer worlds. These crystals were essential components in faster-than-light communication systems, making them among the most valuable resources in the galaxy. The Hegemony Defense Corps, acting on behalf of their member species, had offered to purchase mining rights to the crystal deposits. When the Thylorians declined, preferring to maintain their worlds as nature preserves and philosophical retreats, the hegemony had declared the Thylorian government incompetent to manage strategic resources and had moved to establish a protective administration over the entire Thylorian system. The bombardment of Vylos Prime had begun 6 hours ago. Status of civilian evacuation? Admiral Vasquez asked. The Thylorians are refusing to abandon their homeworld, reported Lieutenant Commander Morrison from the communications station. Their philosophical principles don't permit them to flee in the face of aggression. They're choosing to die rather than live as refugees. It was a decision that resonated deeply with human psychology. The Thylorians were facing extinction for the same reason that Research Station Prometheus had been destroyed, because other species viewed them as obstacles to resource extraction. The difference was that the Thylaurians had 12 million civilians who were about to be murdered for their philosophical commitment to peaceful resistance. Admiral Vasquez had been selected to command the intervention force specifically because of her personal connection to the Kepler 442b incident. As the daughter of Dr. Elena Vasquez and the granddaughter of the woman whose granddaughter had died in the original attack, she understood better than anyone what humanity was fighting for. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Prepare for combat operations. We're going to show the galaxy what the Human Protection Accord actually means." The Second Human Intervention Fleet had been designed specifically for operations like this one. 36 vessels, including the most advanced warships in human inventory, equipped with weapons systems that had been refined based on lessons learned from the Battle of Kepler 442b. But, more importantly, it was crewed by volunteers who had enlisted specifically to honor the memory of those who had died when the galaxy had first noticed humanity. The fleet's approach to the Thylos system had been monitored by intelligence services across the galaxy. 12 different species had representatives observing the engagement, either through stealth reconnaissance vessels or through direct access to hegemony tactical networks. Everyone wanted to know whether humanity's commitment to protecting civilian populations was genuine or merely diplomatic rhetoric. High Admiral Zorix of the Hegemony Defense Corps received Admiral Vasquez's final ultimatum with the contempt of a military leader who commanded a force that outnumbered the human fleet by more than 30%. The mammalian species continues to demonstrate their primitive understanding of galactic realities, she transmitted to her subordinate commanders. They seek to impose their emotional decision-making on civilized space. Destroy their fleet and complete the pacification operation. The Battle of Thylos Prime would be remembered as the moment when humanity proved that their values were not negotiable, regardless of the odds against them. The engagement began with the human fleet's signature tactic, a coordinated quantum tunnel insertion that brought them directly into the heart of the hegemony formation before their opponents could respond. The TNS Remember Them all materialized less than 50 kilometers from the hegemony flagship, close enough for visual contact between the command bridges of the two vessels. Admiral Vasquez's opening move was characteristically human. She targeted the hegemony ships that were actively bombarding the planet's surface, ignoring the more dangerous dreadnoughts that posed the greatest threat to her own fleet. The message was clear: her priority was stopping the murder of civilians, not winning a tactical victory. The quantum disruption warheads that had devastated the Zephyrian fleet 2 years earlier had been improved based on captured hegemony technology. The new weapons created larger disruption fields and could be deployed in coordinated patterns that prevented enemy vessels from escaping through faster-than-light travel. 3 hegemony bombardment cruisers simply ceased to exist as their atomic structure was scattered across multiple dimensions. The plasma bombardment of Thylos Prime's major cities stopped immediately as other hegemony vessels were forced to redirect their weapons to defend against the human assault. High Admiral Zorix watched her carefully planned pacification operation disintegrate under human firepower. The mammals were using tactics that violated every established protocol for civilized warfare. They ignored tactical advantages in favor of protecting enemy civilians. They deployed weapons that had been banned by interstellar treaty, and they fought with a relentless determination that suggested they would rather die than accept defeat. "All vessels, target the human flagship," she ordered. "Eliminate their command structure and the rest will surrender." It was a fundamental misunderstanding of human military psychology. The human fleet was not held together by command authority, it was unified by shared commitment to principles that transcended individual survival. When concentrated fire from 6 hegemony dreadnoughts overwhelmed the Remember Them All's shields and began tearing through her hull, the response was not surrender but escalation. Captain Sarah Kim, commanding the TNS Inevitable, immediately moved her vessel to shield the damaged flagship while transmitting a message that would become legendary in human military history. "This is Captain Kim to all human vessels. The Admiral's ship is damaged but she's still alive and still fighting. We came here to stop genocide, and we're not leaving until that job is finished. Engage at will and make them pay for every civilian they've murdered." The battle that followed was less a military engagement than a demonstration of the difference between fighting for resources and fighting for principles. The hegemony possessed superior numbers and firepower, but humanity possessed something that no amount of technology could replicate: the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for. The turning point came when the TNS Justice Delayed, one of humanity's newest heavy cruisers, successfully penetrated the hegemony defensive screen and engaged High Admiral Zorix's flagship in direct combat. Captain Rodriguez, commanding the Justice Delayed, had lost his entire family in a mining accident that the hegemony had refused to investigate because it would have interfered with resource extraction quotas. "This is for every civilian who ever trusted someone in uniform to protect them," he transmitted as his ship's main weapons arrays focused on the hegemony flagship. The destruction of High Admiral Zorix's command vessel broke the hegemony formation. Faced with human opponents who were willing to die to protect alien civilians, and equipped with weapons that made retreat impossible, the remaining hegemony vessels found themselves in an unwinnable situation. The surrender came from Fleet Commander Kextal, Zorix's second-in-command, who transmitted a message that would reshape galactic understanding of human military capabilities. "Human fleet, this is Fleet Commander Kextal of the Hegemony Defense Corps. We surrender. We request terms for the withdrawal of our forces from Thylorian space." Admiral Vasquez, fighting to maintain consciousness as medics worked to stop the bleeding from shrapnel wounds she had sustained when the Remember Them All's bridge had been hit, managed to respond from her command chair. "Fleet Commander Kextal, your terms are simple. Withdraw all hegemony vessels from this system immediately. Provide reparations to the Thylorian Confederacy for the damage you have caused. And understand that if any hegemony vessel ever again targets civilian populations, humanity will consider it an act of war against the Human Protection Accord." The aftermath of the Battle of Thylos Prime sent shockwaves across galactic civilization. Humanity had faced a military force that significantly outnumbered their own and had achieved not just victory, but complete capitulation of their opponents. More importantly, they had done so while prioritizing the protection of alien civilians over their own tactical advantages. The Thylorian Confederacy, their homeworld scarred but their people saved, became humanity's first formal ally outside the original Human Protection Accord. Their philosophical commitment to peaceful resistance complemented humanity's warrior ethos in ways that created a powerful example for other species facing similar threats. But the victory came at a cost that reminded everyone of the price of maintaining principles in a dangerous galaxy. The Remember Them All was so badly damaged that she would require 6 months of repair work. 17 other human vessels had sustained significant damage, and 43 human military personnel had died protecting people they had never met and would never know. President Morrison, attending the memorial service for those who had died at Thylos Prime, delivered a speech that would define humanity's role in galactic civilization for generations to come. 43 men and women died yesterday defending the principle that civilian populations should not be murdered for the convenience of resource extraction. They died so that 12 million Thylorians could continue to exist, to create art, to pursue philosophy, to raise their children in the worlds their ancestors had built. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives from 17 different species who had come to honor the human sacrifice. Some of you may ask whether 43 human lives were worth 12 million alien lives. That question misses the point entirely. We didn't calculate the exchange rate. We didn't weigh the strategic value of Thylorian space against the cost of intervention. We acted because principles are not negotiable, because protecting innocent lives is not a tactical decision, and because the moment we start calculating whether some civilians are worth defending and others are not, we become the thing we're fighting against. The memorial service was broadcast across the galaxy, and the speech was translated into 47 different languages. Species that had never heard of Earth began to understand that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a militarily powerful civilization that was willing to sacrifice its own resources to protect the weak. The long-term consequences of the Battle of Thylos Prime extended far beyond the immediate military victory. Within 6 months, 11 species had requested to join the Human Protection Accord. The Stellar Commonwealth formally allied with humanity and began jointly patrolling sectors where civilian populations faced threats. Even the Vorthan Republic, initially skeptical of human methods, began incorporating human principles into their own territorial policies. But perhaps the most significant consequence was the fundamental shift in how galactic civilization approached conflicts involving civilian populations. The Thylos Doctrine established that attacks on non-military targets would be met with intervention by human forces, regardless of the political or economic justifications offered by the aggressors. Admiral Vasquez, recovered from her injuries and, promoted to Fleet Admiral in recognition of her leadership at Thylos Prime, stood once again on the bridge of her flagship as it patrolled the outer boundaries of human space. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted when the Zephyrian Collective had destroyed Research Station Prometheus. Humanity was no longer a minor species trying to survive among the stars. They had become the guardians of principles that shaped interstellar law and the protectors of civilizations that could not protect themselves. It was a responsibility that required constant vigilance, considerable resources, and the ongoing willingness to fight and die for people who were not human. But, as Fleet Admiral Vasquez reviewed the reports from across human space, colonies thriving under the protection of the Human Defense Fleet, research stations pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge without fear of alien interference, children being born on worlds that their grandparents could never have imagined, she understood that this was exactly what humanity had always been meant to do. They were the species that had looked at the vast emptiness between stars and decided it needed to be filled with hope, discovery, and the promise that every child deserved a chance to build something better than what they had inherited. The galaxy had forced them to learn the language of violence, but they had spoken it with an accent that was uniquely human, never for conquest or resources, but always in defense of the principles that made civilization worth preserving. The Zephyrian Collective, reduced to a minor regional power after their defeat at Kepler 442b, monitored human activities with the careful attention of a species that had learned too late what happened when you threatened human children. They had awakened something that had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, transforming the balance of power and establishing new rules that prioritized the protection of innocent lives over the convenience of resource extraction. It had begun with 300 people on a distant world who had dared to dream among the stars. It had continued with the fury of a species that refused to accept that some deaths were acceptable costs of galactic expansion. And it had culminated in the emergence of humanity as the conscience of galactic civilization, armed with weapons that could crack planets and principles that could not be compromised. The galaxy had learned why humans were the only species that named their children after concepts like hope and justice, and why they named their warships after concepts like remembrance and retribution. They had learned that when you murder human civilians, you don't just declare war on humanity, you awaken the part of human nature that believes some things are worth dying for, and that protecting the innocent is always one of those things. The stars themselves bore witness to the truth that had emerged from the ashes of Kepler 442b: humanity would remember everything, forgive nothing, and never stop protecting those who could not protect themselves. That was the price of awakening the sleeping giant, and the galaxy would pay it gladly rather than face the alternative.